From Geppetto Studios in New Freedom, Pennsylvania, welcome to the Cosmic Geppetto Podcast, your home for inclusive, positive geek culture, where we talk about movies, comics, music, books, and whatever else we feel like. Please welcome your host,
and that's how you make your living,
Brad Mendenhall.
Hey, it's me, your host, Brad Mendenhall. I can't say familiarity, but damn it, I'm gonna keep trying. It is episode 227. Sarah Black from the Life as a Playlist podcast makes her Cosmic Geppetto debut to discuss how Joss Whedon broke our hearts. We also talk about the Free Britney movement. Anywho, you know what is really cool? Jarf has an upcoming podcast, Dazed and Confused 33 and a Third. He's going to be talking about the film Dazed and Confused, one song at a time. Check it out on Instagram at DazedConfused33.
They're still doing this joke? Do they think it's funny, or is Brad just too lazy to do his own intros?
I think I did it again. I made you ballet. We're more than just friends. Oh, baby, it might seem like a crush, but it doesn't mean that I'm serious.
I am very excited because there's a podcasting personality out there that I've been following a little bit. There's a great podcast called Life as a Playlist, and I've been looking for a reason, an excuse to invite the host, the founder, creator of that podcast on for a while, and I finally had a great reason to do so. So making her Cosmic Geppetto debut, we have Sarah Black. Sarah, how you doing?
I am doing great this morning, and thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited to be here. I enjoy your podcast as well, and I've enjoyed listening to the recent episodes.
Thank you so much. And it's funny because there's great people out there, and we have a wonderful group of contributors to the show. And there just comes times it's like, okay, I need the right thing to ask people to dedicate your time. And there's two big things in pop culture that have been going on right now that were perfect for getting your input and your insight. And I want to start first with the Free Britney movement. And I really need you for this because I never liked Britney Spears. Her music never appealed to me. I never found her particularly likable or engaging. Now, that's fine. I don't need to like everybody. But I did appreciate her success. And also, I always thought she's gotten a really bum rap over the last 10 years because this was somebody who obviously was, and it's documented, she's been going through mental health issues, and it was treated like a joke and a laugh line. Also, some people taking a lot of advantage of her. With the documentary series that just came out, you've seen a lot of people belatedly coming to a realization. It's like, oh, she got a really raw deal.
Yes, and the documentary, I think, does a really good job of dealing with both of those themes, both the media bias that she faced over the years, which we can talk about, some of the interviews with her, the questions that she was asked, especially when she was still a teenager, were absolutely horrendous. And then just as a society, how we treat mental health issues, but specifically how we treat women with mental health issues. And with both of these stories that we're going to discuss today, we live in a cultural climate that routinely villainizes young women. And we like to build up young women, especially if we find them particularly attractive, sexually attractive, and we build them up just so that we can tear them apart and tear them down when they don't fit the mold of what we want them to fit. And with Britney in particular, and there are many examples of this, we see women from Mariah Carey, Taylor Swift, Amy Winehouse, just how they've been treated in the media. You know, Justin Timberlake writes Cry Me a River about the breakup of his relationship with Britney Spears, And in that video, he is like living out a rape fantasy, breaking into her house, and that song is a huge commercial hit, and he was never criticized for it. Meanwhile, Taylor Swift, usually a punchline for writing about her past relationships. But with Britney in particular, she fed right into that virgin whore dichotomy, or the Madonna whore dichotomy, as it's sometimes called. We want to view women either as this perfect, virginal, pure image, or we want to view them as sexual and debased. And with Britney, she confused a lot of people because they wanted her, that Rorschach of her, do you see Britney as the wholesome pop music that you have your 9-year-old listen to, or do you see her as the sexualized Catholic school midriff dancing in the hallways sexual icon? And I think when people couldn't peg her or place her exactly the way they wanted to, and she didn't respond exactly the way they wanted her to, people responded negatively, and it amped up a lot of this horrible media bias and ramped up a lot of how that affected her mental health and how they responded to her when she was starting to suffer from mental health issues.
You bring up something that has been talked about, and it's something that it always bugged me, and it's finally been addressed, where Justin Timberlake really built his solo career on that video, on that Cry Me the River, which I thought was a powerfully mediocre song.
Yeah.
There was so much buzz because he had the Britney lookalike, and it was really a revenge fantasy video of him and this other woman taking pictures of her, the other woman topless in his arms while sneaking around her apartment, and you saw, or her mansion or whatever it was, and you see a model who was definitely selected because she looked a little bit like Britney Spears, similar build and the hair and everything. And it was so much of is Justin doing this as a shot at Britney? And of course he was. Really built his career on that foundation. Now, whether you think the music and the persona and everything else justified the success that he had afterwards, I don't. I have always thought Justin Timberlake was powerfully overrated. But again, that's another thing. I'm not meant to like everybody, but it just always bothered me that he built all the success on the tabloid nature of that video, and then immediately did a lot of "aw shucks, I'm such a nice guy" stuff, because he's always been a charming, likable interview.
I think that's a really important point to bring up, and actually is a theme for both our Britney and Joss Whedon stories, is how people, or men specifically, who come across or who appear as nice guys can often hide behind that veneer of niceness, and in their conversations, their interactions, their dealing with women are quite sexist and will profit off of the model that allows them to do so in our society. So Diane Sawyer, in the interview in 2003, where she was asking Britney Spears about Justin Timberlake, she says, he has gone on television and pretty much said you broke his heart. You did something that caused him so much pain, so much suffering. What did you do? And Sawyer's tone, where she was exasperated and just pointing the blame on Britney, and you can see how uncomfortable and how taken aback, almost shocked Britney is that Diane Sawyer would ask her that question, and ask her that question in that way. And most of the interviews around that time period were about blaming Britney Spears for the end of the relationship and her needing to be accountable for what happened. But with Justin, because he could profit off of what happened with Cry Me a River. And an aside here, this interview I think is a really good example of how other women are upholding patriarchy as well. It's not just men who are part of that system of oppressing women about gender issues, but it's other women who are often doing it as well.
The double standard was profound because not that many years later, it got very, very, very little press. There were a lot of stories, rumors, what have you, about Justin Timberlake stepping out on his now wife, Jessica Biel's, with Olivia Munn. It got a little bit of press, but it didn't affect him, quote unquote, being a good guy or a likable guy. And it's really unfair. It was really one-sided. And also Britney Spears and Justin Timberlake, when that relationship happened, they were kids. They were in their late teens, early 20s.
Right.
I don't think any of us would really want to be judged that much by our worst romantic decisions in late high school or college age.
Absolutely. I know I certainly wouldn't. I'm a much different and better partner at age 44 than I was half my life ago, and it's unreasonable to expect that.
Oh, baby, baby, you better sing a little bit.
Don't tempt me.
Oh, baby, baby.
I'll just do the background, bit in the background, all right?
Oh, baby, baby, how was I supposed to know that something wasn't right? Yeah. Oh, baby, baby, I shouldn't have let you go. And now you're out of sight, yeah. Show me how you want it to be. Tell me, baby, 'cause I need to know now. Because my loneliness is killing me. And I must confess, I still believe. When I'm not with you, I lose my mind. Give me a sign. Hit me, baby, one more time.
Another thing that has been revisited is the Super Bowl performance with Justin Timberlake and Janet Jackson, where at the end of the halftime show, Justin Timberlake reached over, grabbed Janet Jackson's top, apparently was supposed to pull the top part of her outfit and reveal her undergarments, and he accidentally pulled everything, and you ended up seeing her exposed breast. And it was another thing where Janet Jackson's career never recovered from that. And Justin Timberlake, it was barely a blip on his radar. He made an apology, a pretty well done apology, I guess. He said the right things during the next award show, but just how one-sided the vitriol was on that. And it was really all against a woman who, I understand it was in the context, it was an accident, but who was choreographed to be assaulted on stage in front of 80 million people.
Exactly. She was not the perpetrator of the action, and while I don't think Justin Timberlake intended, obviously, to do that, how we respond as a society is the issue. Why are we blaming Janet Jackson? Even if we're not overtly blaming Janet Jackson, the response was that she took the brunt, the fall, if you will, for that event. He didn't, like you said, he didn't experience any negative consequences for it. Meanwhile, her career took a huge hit, and it's incredibly unfair. It shouldn't have happened that way. And the thing is, these things have been happening for decades, and it's really only in the past few years with the Me Too movement and with people finding support on social media with other people that we're even starting to have this conversation or to analyze these events that have occurred the past several decades through a different lens. I mean, a lot of times women will get accused too of, oh, well, you're just doing that for attention, or, well, usually it's that. But the reality of it is you can be a powerful woman, you can be a rich woman, you can be a woman with a huge amount of celebrity, but still, you'll be blamed. It's typical that you'll need multiple corroborators to be listened to. You'll need many people. You'll need an entire Free Britney campaign, or you'll need an entire cast of colleagues when it comes to Joss Whedon, who stand up for you before you're typically listened to or believed.
Well, and then even it can backfire then, because it's funny. It's like there has to be this perfect amount where if it's just one person, then it's dismissed like, hey, that's one person, and the accusations are being leveled against somebody who's been in the entertainment field for 20 years. And are you saying that in 20 years he was only bad to one person? I don't believe it. But then if there ends up being too many people supporting them, there's the accusations of a bandwagon. It's like, oh, well, the other people are just accusing because they think they can get a free ride or they're going to get check out of it. And I remember seeing that with Bill Cosby, where dozens and dozens of accusations that were all very consistent, and also that had been an open secret about bad behavior from Bill Cosby for 20 years. You would see people who seemed bound and determined to believe Bill Cosby, and then they were actually trying to use the sheer volume of accusers as somehow proof that it wasn't real, because you can't win.
That's a really great point. We're very, very quick to believe something negative about a woman, especially if it's something negative where we believe that she's stepped out of her perfect balance of the Madonna whore. You know, you have to be exactly the right amount of both. And if you step out from that, then you will be quickly chastised and villainized. But if you are a huge male celebrity, especially one like Bill Cosby, and for a lot of people, Joss Whedon as well, where they have a deep emotional connection with that person. I mean, entire generation growing up with The Cosby Show, an entire generation of teenagers who felt out of place or didn't belong, you know, growing up with the Buffy and Angel franchise, then it's like something psychological within ourselves. We don't want to believe that that person who provided so much comfort for us would be so horrible, especially if that person is a man, because that's what we're sold that we're supposed to aspire to and to love. And obviously I'm not justifying that. It's absolutely horrible. And you're right, there is that, like, what is that perfect line? If it's one or two people, then why are they saying that? That person's an outlier. And if it's too many people, then it's a pile-on, right? Leave them alone. How could... It's not fair that everyone is just ganging up on them.
When we were in the green room, I mentioned, I came up, I was talking about an old episode where we had I discussed with some guests Ryan Adams. There's a little bit of an under-the-radar thing going on with Phoebe Bridgers, who I'm a fan of. And Phoebe Bridgers has been pretty open about bad interactions she had with Ryan Adams. His private record label produced or distributed one of her first albums. Every move that Phoebe Bridgers makes comes under so many attacks from Ryan Adams fans because his fans don't want to believe he's a bad guy despite huge evidence to the contrary. And I'm a Ryan Adams fan. I loved his music, but it's very obvious that he was, at the absolute best, he's a jerk and a bad guy. At the worst, he should be spending time in prison. But now everything that Phoebe Bridgers does, all of a sudden, this other fandom tries to use that against her. She was just on SNL, and at the end of her second song, she smashed her guitar. She did a Who, Pete Townsend smash her guitar, and it was her just trying to have like a neat, big moment. And people were like, well, I just can't believe she did that. I'll never be a fan of hers again because she destroyed her guitars. Like, really? You care that much?
Yeah, I'm highly doubting it. They're probably fans of Nirvana, people who are saying that. Like, she's not the first person to smash a guitar on stage.
And then it ends up being used as like, oh, it's been done before. It's like, yeah, so's playing a D chord in a song, but, you know, you can only be so original.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you talk about the Madonna whore thing where she made accusations of having a bad relationship with Ryan Adams, and there was a pretty bad power dynamic where she was in her, like, 19 or 20, 21 when involved with him when he was in his late 30s, early 40s. And so she talked about how there was a bad power imbalance. And then recently for her new album, Punisher, which is a really good album, it been nominated for a Grammy. She did an interview and a topless pictorial for Playboy magazine. The vitriol that was sent her way and acting as if this somehow defeated her argument about Ryan Adams being a bad guy because she allowed herself to do a nude pictorial. She's in control of her own body. If she wants to do a nude layout, that's her business. It doesn't make her music any better or worse, nor does it prove or disprove anything that she said about Ryan Adams. To some people, if you're going to make an accusation against somebody I like, well, then you have to be a perfect, in my mind, what is a perfect angelic creature, or it completely disproves everything you've said.
Yeah, and obviously those two things are unrelated, and people want to see that. Like, they'll want to see her naked. They'll purchase that issue or view those pictures, but they want to do it on their terms, as if they have ownership over her. But her making that decision for herself is now a problem and something that we can use to villainize her or discredit her. It comes down to agency again, and feeling like women don't have the right to agency and to decide what decisions to make for their own careers, or deciding what decisions, and maybe she just wanted to. I mean, I'm sure she did it for personal reasons, career reasons, and it has absolutely no relevance or bearing on any of the accusations or any of the events that happened to her. And we see this with Britney Spears too, because a lot of people had this idea of her that she was just weak, or she was just being manipulated by forces around her, and that she's also now incompetent, which is why they're claiming that she needs to have a conservatorship, when the reality is that Britney Spears was making lots of creative decisions, and she was largely in charge of her own career. So I love the quote when she says in the interview, "I'm not a diva, I just know what I want." But the idea that she can know what she wants and that she can make those decisions for herself, people don't accept that. So now we even have, as we're talking about Britney Spears, this other dichotomy where we're still viewing her as a victim. And while she largely was a victim, both of the media and both in how her mental health issues have been discussed and treated, I think we also need to be careful to not just have this story of Britney Spears as victim.
What do you think's next? Because I know there have been lawsuits trying to change the conservatorship. From your sense, because there seems to be a change in the way her situation's been viewed, everything from people going back 5-8 years and realizing, wow, David Letterman gave a really crappy interview and Joel McHale made fun of her all the time on The Soup. The views seem to be changing ever so slowly. From where do you see, is this going to be more than just we all feel bad about it for 6 months and then everything goes back to the way it was, or do you think there's real change afoot?
I'm hoping we can have real change. We can enact real change from watching this situation. I mean, I just want to say, yeah, Joel McHale, every radio talk show host or just radio morning DJ, even Diane Sawyer, like we said, who's a highly, highly reputable interviewer, considered one of the best, if not the best in the business, was horrible in how she treated Britney Spears in interviews. And this goes back to her Star Search appearance when I think she was around 11 years old. And after her amazing performance, and that's another thing, people have this idea that Britney Spears isn't a talented singer, that she's not a particularly talented performer. And if you listen to her performances in her younger years before she was packaged and sold the way she was. She has an incredible, just deep, rich, alto, powerful voice, and you hear that in her Star Search performance and in some of her earlier mall performances right before she got super famous. But in that interview, Ed McMahon, the first thing that he asked her about, a prepubescent girl, is whether she has a boyfriend. And when she is taken aback, even as a as a preteen, like, why are you asking me that? She's looking at him, and he's like, well, could I be your boyfriend? And why is a 70-year-old man asking a prepubescent girl on national television if she can be his boyfriend? And she was just relentlessly dragged for decades in interviews. And when it comes to mental health, it's like, yes, she's a huge media punchline. All of the tabloids, she was relentlessly chased by paparazzi. And when she asked them to stop, just said this is too much for her. Interviews with the paparazzi in the documentary were just, I didn't know that she wanted me to stop. And one of the quotes that just really floored me was one of the paparazzi saying, well, yeah, she told me she wanted me to stop, but I didn't really believe her.
The paparazzi, when you would see interviews with different paparazzi and people defending that group and acting like she owed them something, that there was this huge price to be paid for her celebrity. You know, we're living in an era where Princess Diana is dead because of the way that she was chased by photographers. Some people have turned that weird sort of their picture being taken into, you know, listen, the Kardashians are famous. And a lot of that was because they were very good at manipulating the paparazzi and created that sort of celebrity. But it's a really nasty, vampiric relationship where they're just draining the life out of these people. When you have somebody going through mental health issues, constantly being chased and pictures and the way they were trying. I remember there was, a lifetime ago, reading a story of one paparazzi who was trying to get a picture taken of Britney and when she was married to Kevin Federline doing a child care handoff, like, because Federline had kids from a previous relationship and trying to get a picture of Britney, like, holding her stepchild. I was like, wow, we're involving kids in this, not just somebody who we're going to find out is having some pretty severe mental health issues. And that's how you make your living.
Absolutely. And we push and we push. And in the case of Britney Spears, we're pushing someone who obviously has mental health issues. And the sad thing about with the mental health issues with Britney Spears is when you see interviews with her when she's younger, she is so bright. She is so full of life. She is so excited about her career. She clearly loves performing. I don't know. It's like you just see the light over the years just gone from her. It is vampiric. It's like you can actually see her soul, her energy, her light disappearing over these decades of time as she's abused, as she's undergoing all of these interviews, as she's being chased by paparazzi, as people are talking about it. It's like we don't view celebrities as actual human beings or people, but I guarantee if any one of us just were subjected to that, we would suffer from that as well. And then the worst part is when a woman especially starts responding with those mental health related issues, then we just call them crazy or hysterical or why are they lashing out? What's wrong with her? And there's a clear line. You can see why she's responding the way that she is. And there's so many issues. I mean, we could honestly talk about this for days because there's a whole other aspect in terms of her getting married and having children, and it appears she might be suffering from postpartum depression and not getting support there, and how women are treated as mother. I mean, we won't obviously, but there are just so many layers and levels to this.
She broke through when she was in 15, 16 years old, and they were definitely doing the naughty schoolgirl, the way she was packaged. The dialogue about her was so uncomfortable because you would have adult men way too old to be talking about her the way they were talking about her. it was weirdly acceptable. And then you realize there have been so many instances of that in pop culture over the years. Go back to the 70s when you had a 13-year-old or however old she was, Brooke Shields, doing the Nothing Gets in Between Me and My Calvin's ads where she was topless, turned away from the camera, or however it was, but still being drooled over. And it's like, she's not old enough to drive. And then more recently, go back 10 plus years ago, when the Olsen twins were becoming attractive young women, all the weird, creepy jokes about, oh, they're going to be 18 and such a date, and then everyone can do or say what they want. It's like, what the hell are we doing, guys?
Yes, thank you. I was just about to bring that up. Are you familiar with the term jailbait clock? So that's essentially they did. There's this jailbait clock, essentially, where we're over-sexualizing prepubescent and teenage girls and having an actual countdown clock, which there were online, on social media, on radio shows, where the days were literally counted down until it would be legal to have sex with the Olsen twins, or any number. It wasn't just them.
Thank God. I don't think I've seen, and maybe it's just because I'm not real familiar who's the really popular young teen actress right now, because I'm not a target audience anymore, but it feels like it's been a while since they had that. The last one I can remember is, what was it, Hayden Panettiere, when she was the cheerleader on Heroes.
Right, yes.
And there was a little bit of a weird thing about that, especially because she's playing a high school cheerleader, and she was also 17 or so at the time. They even would ask her co-stars about that. They asked Milo Ventimiglia, who's now on This Is Us, is like, oh, well, what do you think about Hayden Panettiere? Isn't she cute? And he's like, well, she's 17, so I can't talk about it, but I'll talk about it once she turns 18. And it was just a joke in an interview.
That's how pervasive it is, that it would just be a casual joke in an interview, and he wouldn't even, I'm sure it wasn't even a malicious response. It's just, we're so well conditioned that that's how we talk about women, and that's who they are. They're sex objects, and we're just waiting until the day that we won't get in trouble for talking about them as sex objects, and that's a huge problem.
Early morning, she wakes up, knock, knock, knock on the door. It's time for makeup, perfect smile. It's you they're all waiting for.
So speaking of huge problems, because I do really smooth transitions, you already sort of mentioned it in passing, but so Joss Whedon, I am the first person to say, especially in my 20s when he was at his most creatively active, I was a huge Joss Whedon fan. I loved Buffy. I loved Angel. Serenity is one of my favorite movies. Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog I thought was really innovative and really a great use of a new format. And I thought he did a great job with the first two Avengers movies. And I grew up a comic book fan. And the fact that those movies weren't terrible, I thought was a real statement about his abilities. And now it turns out Joss Whedon, who everyone wanted to like because he came across as likable and a geeky guy who made good, and also somebody who wrote women very well. And it turns out he's terrible.
Yeah, I would agree with 99% of that, except for writing women particularly well. I do have some issues with how he writes women, and viewing it through 2021 lens, say looking at the Buffy season 8 comic, or seeing how sexuality was discussed on Buffy, I definitely view that differently. But like you, I was a huge Joss Whedon fan. Buffy's actually my favorite show of all time. It's one of the few that I own on box set. It's my go-to to rewatch. And I was thinking about that a lot because these allegations by Charisma Carpenter, which are concrete and backed up by multiple sources, are not new. They're from 2009, and they certainly weren't. I mean, this isn't the first time that I heard her allegations, but I'm viewing them differently now than I did a decade ago. I too was partly responsible for that because I don't know, I wasn't as affected hearing them a decade ago as I was now. And that's a problem. I mean, that speaks to my own internalized misogyny, where I would read that 10 years ago and be like, wow, that really sucks. But beyond that, I didn't think about it or consider it, or it didn't really change my feelings for Joss Whedon or for his show. And now we're viewing it through a post-Me Too lens, and we're also seeing a lot more corroboration for her story. Her story is backed up, and we talked about that before. Why does her story have to be backed up by so many people for us to take it seriously? But yeah, I love Joss Whedon. Buffy's my favorite, so it's been different processing this.
Because over the last 3-4 years, there have been a lot of problems. You had the accusations from his ex-wife that he was a bad husband. Those accusations came out. I was like, well, okay, I don't expect the people in entertainment that I like to be perfect behind the scenes. And if I found out my dentist was a lousy spouse, I wouldn't affect the way I think they do fixing my teeth. I'm a big Ben Folds fan, and Ben Folds, I think he's currently on marriage number 4. He's not very good at being married, but that doesn't make his music any better or worse. So I was able to sort of excuse that. More recently with the Ray Fisher accusations about Joss Whedon's behavior on the set of Justice League, Ray Fisher was an imperfect accuser, I think, because he was sort of making his accusations via drips and drabs and not coming out and saying what the problem was. But I think there were legal reasons for that, because there's NDAs that are signed or whatever. But it's still, there was enough air there for me to be able to dismiss it a little bit. But when it's Cordelia, when it's Charisma Carpenter, this is Cordelia. She was such a life's blood of that world for so long. Everything she said makes it snap into place for me, and also makes me view those other accusations in a completely different way. And it really hurts.
Yeah, I think a couple of things here. This idea of people being imperfect victims. So if it's just Ray Fisher, do we take it seriously because he's an imperfect victim? And just this idea that victims, again, have to do the perfect thing. They can't pose nude and then be a victim, or they can't have anything that we would view as, losing a different word, but yeah, anyway, they can't be the imperfect victim, but it's okay for Joss Whedon to be imperfect. It's okay for the person with more power to be imperfect. We're more likely to excuse that because of the power differential and because of how we feel about him and his show. And also this other idea, I would say there's a distinction between maybe seeing your dentist who's really bad at marriage, because your dentist's job is to fix your teeth, but somebody like Joss Whedon, who's a director, a writer, his job is to shape and tell stories which have a huge impact on how we view ourselves and on the world, how he treats the people he works with, how he interacts impersonally. I would say that matters more than your dentist because of the specific, not just the influence and the power that he has, but the specific type of influence and power that he has.
He was one of those rare director/screenwriters who had celebrity himself, who had influence. And a lot of people viewed him as somebody who you would want writing a female voice. Of course, when you look back at some of the things he wrote, some of them were still great. And some Buffy stuff and some Angel stuff still holds up. Of course, now I look at what he did with one of his less popular shows when he did Dollhouse.
Oh, wow.
When that came out, I was like, hey, great, this is going to be a great chance for Eliza Dushku, who they didn't have the easiest time figuring out where to find the right vehicle for. It's like, it's going to be great, her and Joss Whedon again. But she basically played a blank slate every episode, and some sort of weird sci-fi prostitute, very sexualized. She was the star of the show, and she didn't have any character.
And that's very indicative of Whedon, I think, and how he really thought and how he really felt. We view Buffy, or I don't know, I did watch Dollhouse when it came out, but never really revisited it or thought about it much after that. So I don't know if Dollhouse was viewed as a feminist show. I know Buffy definitely was, but he's not really giving the women agency so much as he's controlling them or writing them from his lens. And when we look at what happened with Charisma Carpenter, it wasn't just that he was a terrible boss. The things specifically that he was terrible to her about were directly related to her womanhood, how he treated her specifically when she got pregnant, and how she was written off, forced to show up on set at 1 a.m. at unreasonable times, and the fact that he used her being a woman against her and the things that he was attacking her for, like her pregnancy and like her weight. Yeah, a lot of these things aren't new. I remember reading about how he didn't want to cast Amber Benson as Tara because he felt that she was fat. And if you look, she does have a slightly different body type than his preferred body type, which is a Sarah Michelle Gellar. And I remember reading that and thinking, wow, that really sucks. But even knowing that, like, these things about Joss Whedon aren't new, but I still just process them as oh, that's not cool. But then not really thinking about it beyond that.
So much of the frustration is, be it Joss Whedon, Bill Cosby, Bryan Singer, a lot of these people who we act so surprised when after 20 years of rumors of terrible behavior, oh, you mean all those stories that we heard that they were joking, like with Bill Cosby, they were joking about Bill Cosby being a terrible human being 20 years ago when Tina Fey was hosting a Weekend Update. And we keep acting surprised. It's like, no, these people were allowed to be terrible people for a long time. There's a really crappy thing that happens in entertainment where being a garbage human being or having abuse issues or being difficult to different degrees ends up being excused because of, or as part of the creative process. We ignore it when people are telling us who they are. As we're talking, I think it's on HBO Max is going to be running a documentary about the accusations on Woody Allen. Woody Allen had so many movies about him having crushes or romantic feelings to women who were just barely one side or the other of legal age.
Right.
And then we're surprised when it turns out he's a creep.
I think we more want to feign surprise because maybe responding how we want to would be too difficult. It's like we either respond with surprise or we respond with deep, deep sadness and really having to come to a reckoning of our heroes not really being heroes. And so surprise is a more comfortable emotion. It's a more comfortable response than really sitting with exactly who we've been as a society these past decades. But yeah, it's a very similar trajectory with Harvey Weinstein would be another example of that, where people knew for decades exactly what he was, who he was, and what he was doing.
Notice me, take my hand. Why are we strangers when?
Harvey Weinstein, there would just be stories upon stories about how ignorant, arrogant, and belligerent he was. And it would somehow, those stories would be told as if that was part of his charm. Like, oh, that's Harvey being Harvey. But also a known thing where, 5-10 years ago, Seth MacFarlane and Emilia Clarke were announcing Oscar nominees for Best Actress. They announced all the names, and then at the end, Seth MacFarlane ad-libbed is like, "Congratulations, ladies, you no longer have to pretend to be attracted to Harvey Weinstein." And it got a big laugh.
Wow.
But good Lord.
And it's shocking, because it's like, what do you even do in that situation? I'm sure a lot of that was quite uncomfortable laughter.
30 Rock also did a thing where Jenna's character said how she had rejected sexual advances from Harvey Weinstein 3 times, and then under her breath she said, out of 5. This is a nationally broadcast TV show, and his behavior was so out in the open that they decided to make a joke about it.
That's another issue as well, where women will be accused of sleeping their way to the top, and that's how we discuss it. People have made those have made those accusations about Kamala Harris, about so many actresses. Why are we viewing it as, oh, well, she slept her way to the top, rather than why do women have to perform sexual favors? Why do women basically have to be assaulted and raped in order to get promoted or in order to get the job? Why are we viewing it that way rather than acknowledging what's actually happening?
Not that long ago, I was talking with a female friend of mine who revealed a story where a guy in a position of authority made a pass at her. She not only rejected him, but took him to task. His response was, I've been doing this for years and it's never been a problem before. It's like, geez.
Yeah.
The commonplace of that behavior that you actually defend yourself with, hey, I tried to sleep with you and I'm in a position of power and I have the ability to give you a promotion, but it never was a big deal before. It's like you've done it so much and everything is so skewed in your favor as a cisgendered white male in your 40s with promotable ability that nobody blinks, that you actually try to use the fact that you do this horrible thing over and over again as justification.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. I have the power. This is the way society is. I've never been held accountable for any of my behavior, so who do you think you are for trying to hold me accountable to it now? Like, don't you know the way this works? Are you new here? And there is a lot of that attitude, and Charisma Carpenter talks about that as well, that she was in a position of much less power. She was the sole breadwinner for her family, or at least it might be primary, but she said she made most of the income for keeping her family afloat and for taking care of her soon-to-be baby, and so she didn't feel like she could respond the way she wanted to respond then because of the power differential and because she needed the money. And we see this with women in the workplace all the time. Women are often the sole breadwinners in families, or the primary breadwinners, or they're the ones who will lose their job. They're the ones who will be shunned from the industry. They're the ones who will be viewed poorly and be castigated if they speak up at the time. But then you'll hear a lot of that. That's another excuse that will be made for the men in power is, well, why didn't you say anything at the time? And actually, Giles, what's the actor's name? I just lost it.
Anthony Stewart Head.
Anthony Stewart Head responded that way as well. In an interview, he basically saying, like, how are my glasses this fogged up? How did I not see what was going on? And why didn't these young actresses, because I'm the father figure on the show, why didn't they come to me and talk to me? That really hit me the wrong way, because one, even if you were a father figure on the show, even if you generally were a good guy on the show and you didn't do anything wrong, people are not necessarily going to feel comfortable speaking, women specifically, to another man when there's a whole history their entire lives of men being protected and defended and them being punished when they speak out. That bothered me that he would respond that way, and to just kind of flippantly say, well, need to clean off my glasses, how did I not see it? And that's the thing. I don't know whether he saw or didn't see. If he didn't see, that's a problem, because why are other men so oblivious to what's going on? And if he did see, it seems like he's giving cover or making excuses for himself now. And there was quite a difference in how the male actors on Buffy responded versus how the female actors on Buffy responded to these allegations against Joss Whedon.
Yeah, I know David Boreanaz, he made a statement of support. Alan Tudyk, and now this was back in June before we knew anything, before Charisma Carpenter came forward, but he actually came out in support of Whedon.
Nicholas Brendan, who plays Xander, of course, also came out in defense of Whedon, or at least was walking a very dangerous line. In a recent interview, he said, I mean, unless you know Joss, it's just kind of like, in this first part, right, that's just what we were talking about. Well, you know Harvey, or you know Bill Cosby, right? You know, it's just Joss. It's just kind of like, out of this, I just hope that growth comes and healing and then being a better person and a better people, because I think that's what every day is about. You know what I mean? Not beating someone up. So insinuating that we're just beating Joss up for this. Nicholas Brendan's career is pretty much resting on making money from conventions for longtime fans, so it seems pretty self-protective.
Yeah, he's worried there's not going to be any more space for Buffy at conventions, and also that the rest of his convention career is going to be answering questions about why he didn't do stuff, or was Joss Whedon that bad a guy?
Exactly. And he also said, it's like I had my relationship with Joss as well, and I love him. You know, for me, I take the good and the bad, but that's not everybody. What? Like, what was Charisma Carpenter supposed to do? Like, I'm sorry that you did this to me. I guess that's just the bad. You know, you take the good and the bad, and basically victim blaming is how I read that.
I just think about it from Charisma Carpenter's perspective. I'm sure she knew what happened to Mira Sorvino, a beautiful, talented, Oscar-winning actress, but because my understanding is she rejected Harvey Weinstein's advances, and all of a sudden her career got gutted. And she went from winning Oscars and starring in, you know, successful movies like Romeo and Michelle, and all of a sudden she couldn't get major roles in movies because she had somebody who was very powerful in Hollywood bad-mouthing her every chance she had. This was Paul Sorvino's daughter. This is somebody who had a foothold in the industry and had Oscars and financially successful movies, and still a powerful enough person being your enemy destroyed her. So when your Charisma Carpenter, so much of her success and her career up to that point was tied up in doing work with Joss Whedon, she knew, oh my God, if I come out at this point when I'm in a very delicate part of my life, it's going to crush my career. And Charisma Carpenter's career never was the same post-Angel.
No, it never was. And she was incredibly talented. I loved her. I was curious to see where she was going to go next. And it's a tragedy that this happened to her because it shouldn't have.
She was a talented, beautiful woman with awareness and a good fan base. She did like one or two Hallmark movies and had a terrible backup role in the first two Expendables, because if you're a woman in movies, you don't really want to be a character in Expendables movies because you're either going to be rescued or having somebody defend your honor, which is all that happened to her. She just would show up with a black eye and had a guy punch other people to defend her.
With Mira Sorvino and with Britney Spears, we see again, they both had money, they both had power, they both had a lot of connections. It still didn't protect them. So with Charisma Carpenter, who had much less of all of those things, of course she wasn't going to feel safe to talk about what was actually happening.
Janet Jackson, she has sold tens, if not hundreds of millions of albums, won Grammys, even had done some acting, was a part of a huge music family, and still her career got gutted because of someone else's actions. There you have the double whammy of being a woman of color. All those things just seem to be enough to override all the success and the fact that she was the victim in the situation.
In all of these cases, the women have been the victim. I just go back to the Anthony Stewart Head interview. He says, one of my memories, my fondest memory, in fact, was that he, meaning Joss, was so empowering, not just in the words of the script, but in the family feel of the show. there are men, in particular, like Joss Whedon, who are using feminism, using progressivism as a shield for their horribly abusive behavior.
There was a story of, and I can't remember the name of the woman, but she was a very successful model who was sort of dabbling with making the move to acting. Harvey Weinstein wanted to set up a meeting with her. I'm sure I'm getting some of the details somewhat wrong, but she basically shows up at the meeting. He was presenting himself as like, you should be my girlfriend, expressing his attraction to her and saying, I could do so much for your career as an actor if we were to have a quote unquote special relationship. The woman was very lucky. She didn't need acting. She didn't need him. She had a successful modeling career that she'd made enough money where she was in a position of power. And she said, basically, no, thanks. I'm not that interested in acting. I'm more interested in becoming politically active. And Weinstein turned it around to, well, I have a good relationship with Hillary Clinton's people, and I'm very involved in progressive politics. So it's sort of like what you're saying, where Harvey Weinstein would present himself as somebody who was fighting the good fight for feminist and progressive ideas while sexually assaulting women or blackmailing them and holding their careers over their heads because of the power he had.
It's a particular type of evil, this insidious type, where by fighting for the supposed greater good or fighting for progressive causes or for feminist causes, using that so that personally you can do whatever you want. You can get away with whatever you want. By claiming that identity for yourself, it's providing cover for you to act abusive, for you to wield that power, like wielding individual power by claiming that you're fighting against, and in some cases, maybe actually fighting against the greater power, but doing it to protect or to maintain your personal power. It's kind of hard to explain that.
It's really complicated. It's tough because people who, on the surface, you want to agree with or you want to believe they're pure of heart as they're fighting for the same causes that you support, and then finding out that they're using it, it seems like it's just a cover.
Yeah.
A way to ingratiate themselves into a world where they can do terrible things. And it's heartbreaking.
And we want to view Whedon as this feminist, but it wasn't even just Charisma Carpenter. He would also disparage Sarah Michelle Gellar. At industry events, he called her film Cruel Intentions a porny. And Sarah Michelle Gellar was really upset about that. She said, I did what I think is my best work to date in that movie. By Joss brushing it off and just calling it a porny is unbelievably hurtful to me. Gellar apparently also said she didn't say much now about, she did say that she supported the accusers, but she didn't say much else. But back in 2003, Freddie Prinze Jr., her husband, said that his wife dealt with, quote, a lot of nonsense behind the scenes of the show. And apparently Gellar herself did also express discomfort over having to film sadomasochistic sex scenes. And I'm sure for people who are familiar with Buffy and Angel, there are certain scenes on the show that would come to mind, specifically with Buffy and Spike. But in that interview, said Joss doesn't feel like Sarah's ever shown the proper amount of gratitude for what he's done for her in her career. So Joss views himself as this feminist savior, I guess, who has done Sarah Michelle Gellar a giant favor, when I would argue Sarah Michelle Gellar put Joss Whedon on the map as well. She made his show incredibly popular.
Well, because Sarah Michelle Gellar was an ascendant talent at the time. Very charismatic, attractive with screen presence and a good actress. I think it's telling that during the second season, Sarah Michelle Gellar was the one who was asked to host SNL, which was a big boost for that show. Not Joss Whedon. Really, at that point, Joss Whedon had just written some pretty modestly successful, if successful at all, movies. It was a good relationship for them. They both benefited because he gave her a career-defining role, but she gave him star power and somebody who was a great face for that franchise. So acting like she owed him anything other than long hours and promotion and talking up the show and doing every interview that she could, appearing on the cover of Rolling Stone and Entertainment Weekly and all that, as if she owes him more than that, is ridiculous.
It is. And she's the one who typically bore the brunt of the fan backlash on that. Fans consistently gave Whedon the benefit of the doubt because, like you said, he was that nerdy but kind of charming. He's the kind of guy, people want to see succeed because they see themselves in him. If he can do this, if he, as just this kind of nerdy, lovable guy, can achieve this success, then we all can do it, right? He's the everyman hero. And so this cult-like devotion sprung up around him, and the fans were much more quick to defend him when this was going on online rather than Sarah Michelle Gellar.
And I was guilty of that too, where this was a guy who grew up reading X-Men and Avengers and loved comics. He then had a chance to take those ideas and sprinkle it with Supernatural. There were some really great episodes of Buffy, and he had a great concept for the show because he said it was like, imagine if a girl's walking down the hallway in a horror movie and then when attacked by the vampire or the demon, turns around and kicks its butt. And that's a great concept. And then once he achieved his fame, he went and he wrote comic books. He wrote this great run on X-Men. And then he got to direct a comic book movie, and it was one of the top 10 most financially successful films of all time. There's so much geek fanboy wish fulfillment there. And you don't want the person who's sort of living the life you want to then turns out, but they're actually a horrible human being. Because what does that say about you, that you wanted that same life and you wanted to go about it that way? And then discovering it's like, part of the way he did it was by treating the people who gave him so much success, and he treated them terrible.
Exactly. We don't want to have to come to our own reckonings. We want to believe that we're feminist heroes too, and a lot of guys, it seems like they want to view themselves as the good guys because they support the right things and the right shows and are fans of the right people. Or they come to find out that they're not, then they have to do more soul searching or think more about what are times maybe that I've behaved inappropriately, or what are things that I've done wrong, or what was I brought up to believe that's pretty toxic. What changes do I have to make? It's easier to just be a fan of Joss and view Joss the way that we want to view him as this feminist hero, because it means that we don't have to really check or consider our own thoughts and behaviors.
Sarah, this is it's been amazing talking with you. I'm so glad you were, and I really appreciate you taking the time. For letting you go, I need you to plug your pluggables. Talk a little bit about Life as a Playlist.
So Life as a Playlist is my podcast where I share a lot of my childhood experiences and how they've shaped my social and political worldviews, and I do that through the lens of Billboard Top 40 hits. So I just have a really good time, sometimes autobiographical, sometimes whatever the social or political contemporary topics are, and you can listen to Life as a Playlist anywhere you hear your podcasts and follow the show on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and also do some movies by minute shows, Pump Up the Minute, which looked at Pump Up the Volume, and that had more of a political mass media bent to it, and 5 Minute Arrival, which is looking at the film Arrival 5 minutes at a time, and I get to discuss lots of good communication theory and philosophy in that show. So those are my projects for now.
Well, I'm a big fan of Pump Up the Volume. I think a lot of people who are doing podcasts right now around my age, in their 40s, a lot of the seeds for what we're doing now started with that movie. Life is a Playlist, really enjoying that. And it's so admirable because you do these great sort of windows into your soul. Like you, music is very important to me. And a lot of the stories of my life can be tied to the first time I heard that song or the importance of this album to me. It's really courageous because you share a lot of yourself while talking about this music, and it's engrossing and it's engaging, and you're doing some really cool stuff. So I've been enjoying it a lot.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Having the chaotic childhood that I did, struggling just a lot with family issues and with my own mental health issues at a time when people didn't really talk about them or even know what they were as much as they do now. Top 40 music was a stabilizing force in my life. It was something that I could always turn to. Like, I knew Casey Kasem's Top 40. I could hear that every Sunday, and it was stabilizing. It was a ritual for me. So that was my inspiration for the show.
I'm enjoying it so much. It's been great having you on. Will you come back?
Absolutely. Yes, this was a great time. So I would be happy to come back.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
That wraps episode 227. Big thanks to Sarah Black. I am a fan of hers, and it was great having her on. She will return. Also, big thanks to Jarf Hardin and Alice Lauren. He's the lifeblood of this program, and she is one of my favorites. Next time on the Cosmic Geppetto Podcast, podcasting prodigy Luke Allen returns to the show. He's bringing with him his co-writer and co-director, Alex Yousefi. Also joining the fun is actor Ewan McIntosh, who played Keith on the original UK version of The Office. People pay good money to get messages from this guy on Cameo, but you get him here for free. Till then, in the words of Jarf Hardin,
see you in the funny pages.
Subscribe to the Cosmic Geppetto Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever quality podcasts can be found. Rate and review us while there. Follow us on Twitter at CosmicGPod, and we will follow you back. Unless you're a jerk. We don't follow jerks. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cosmic Geppetto. We love hearing your ideas for upcoming episodes. Email us at cosmicgeppetto@comcast.net.
Top 40 music was a stabilizing force in my life.
Can't you feel me now? Taste of your lips, I'm on a run. You're toxic, I'm slipping under. A taste of your poison paradise. I'm addicted to you, but you know that you're toxic. And I love what you do, but you know that you're toxic, Sean. Taste of your lips, I'm on a run. I'm slipping under. Taste of your poison paradise. I'm addicted to you, but you know that you need the taste of your lips. I'm on a run. You're toxic, I'm slipping under. Taste of your poison paradise. I'm addicted to you, but you know that you're toxic. Intoxicate me now with your loving now. I think I'm ready now. I think I'm ready now. Intoxicate me now with your loving now. Oh, Pickathon, I'm ready now. I'm ready. In all sincerity, that is a truly spectacular song. I am dead serious. There has not been better in the last 25 years.